very happy to be here. And I'm very happy to be talking to you about our project. And let me share my screen for a second, and I can start from there. So as Davina said, I'm going to be talking about a project that I've been doing this year between Ulster University and St. Patrick's Academy in Dungannon, a large secondary school here in Northern Ireland. This is a joint project between myself and also my research associate, Dr. Morgan MacLeod, who can't be with us today. And if you are at all at some point, if at any point you like what you hear, you should praise him more than me. But essentially, let me just start by saying I will do two things in this talk. First, I will give you an overview about the project in general, and then secondly, I will be giving you a taster of one of the sessions that we have planned, and this will make sense in a second. So this project is funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council under the scheme of impact and engagement. And it really stemmed from some pretty dire reports of the British Council on Language Trends Northern Ireland that really revealed a very, very difficult situation of languages in the region. For those of you that are not aware, I think it was 2015. Since 2015, Northern Ireland does not have compulsory modern languages in primary schools. And this has really affected language learning in the region in a profound way. There's been a sharp drop in modern languages A levels that is continuing. So for us, it really came as this project came as a way to try to address this. We call this, the crisis of modern languages in Northern Ireland. But unfortunately, I think there is some comparison with the rest of the UK. So we thought that the way to address this is to create a comprehensive set of teaching resources that will underpin modern language teaching in secondary schools. And we tried, as I said, to collaborate with the school to see what these resources should be, where there should be at the curriculum. So this is what I would like to present to you today. So our project is essentially a language awareness module that will integrate methods of linguistic analysis and language evolution with other aspects of the curriculum for children that are at year 9. Northern Ireland has 7 years in primary school. So the first year of secondary school is year 8, and our children that are taking part in the pilot are of year 9. And the overarching aim really is to introduce pupils to key grammatical concepts by making use of examples from a variety of languages. So we picked languages that are frequently taught in Northern Irish schools: French, Spanish, German, and Irish. Classical and medieval languages, because this is our background. My background is a historical linguist. I work on ancient Greek, and Morgan's background is on Old English. And we thought it is a good idea to also bring classical languages and essentially demystify them slightly. But also, I think importantly, heritage languages and minority languages spoken frequently from the pupils themselves. So for Northern Ireland and for our school in particular, this is Polish, Lithuanian, but also Portuguese. So we've tried to incorporate that, and I will explain also the reason behind it a bit more in a second. And in this project, we just really want to use the tools that historical linguists and theoretical linguists have been using, which is the comparative method and the diachronic method, and see how we can use them into language teaching. What I mean by that is that very often when linguists want to understand a phenomenon better, they compare languages side by side. And they say, well, in this particular phenomenon, it makes sense to compare, let's say, Irish, because it's a verb first language. It has a weird order of verb, subject, object, with Arabic that also has this order. And all of these are unrelated languages on many respects. In this phenomenon, it makes sense to compare them. So this is what I mean when I say the comparative method. And of course, the diachronic method, which is something that I've utilized in my in my work to see how particular phenomena, grammatical phenomena, change over time. So the goals for this project, as I said, is to support foreign language teaching, foreign language learning, but also literacy. And it is interesting, I will talk about this in a second, that the teacher that is piloting, that is working with us in St. Patrick's Academy and is delivering this module for us in this pilot form is the English teacher. And she has been really excellent in working with us to try to see the synergies. So in that sense, it's really a cross-curricular module by design. And we want to give students language awareness skills and analytical skills that they could apply both to their own language and in their additional languages. We want them essentially to understand language as a system better, of course, with a focus on grammar, not every aspect of language, and see how they can use that when also trying to learn foreign languages. We also try to share the insights that I sort of discussed in the last slide that linguistics has been using for a while, and see how they can be exploited in the language learning environment. We want to engage pupils' engagement, and this is where the ideas about using heritage languages comes from. And this also relates to the second point. We want to utilize the expertise of our multilingual pupils, engage them and empower them to use their knowledge as bilingual speakers themselves in classroom. We do this for more than one reasons, and one that is close to my heart is the fact that multilingual speakers, very often speakers of minority languages, have perhaps might not do fantastically in school in certain subjects, but they are experts in their own languages. And we want to use this knowledge to empower them and to give them a voice also in the classroom that bridges what they have at home, this additional language, and their school. And as I've said already, what we're doing this year is we're collaborating with St. Patrick's Academy in creating and piloting these resources. So it's been invaluable to us that the two teachers that are working with us from St. Patrick's are really involved in the design, and they are a wonderful springboard for our ideas. Our biggest worry when we started is how we are going, whether we're aiming too high, whether our materials would be a bit boring for the students. We've never created material for school children before, so we've been very grateful to the teachers that have guided us in that. I talked about the cross-curricularity, I don't even know if that's a word, of the project. And all I wanted to say in addition to that is that as you will see in the sample lesson that I will give you, it does not focus on a single language at a time. It emphasizes features that languages have in common, using examples from multiple sources to illustrate a phenomenon. So it's a phenomenon-based project where we talk about certain grammatical concepts with examples from various languages. And obviously, it does not give an overview of all aspects of a single language. Because of my background and my bias, for example, it ignores pronunciation entirely, or it doesn't talk about cultural aspect of languages. It is really focused on grammar. We feel also that by comparing ancient and modern languages, it will really help students perceive something that is quite important for linguists, but I think for everybody, the idea of variation, the idea of non-standard varieties, their speakers, something that I think is often stigmatized in some schools, and definitely in our region. Northern Irish variety is definitely frowned upon and corrected as incorrect. And as linguists, we know that there is a lot of value in the different varieties, and we feel that language change really gives students and teachers a good chance to understand why that is the case. When we were designing this, we had a couple of things in mind. One of this that we felt was very important is that it assumes no previous experience in any language teaching. And that is exactly because we, at the moment when we designed it, we aimed it at Northern Irish schools, and we were not certain at all whether any of our pupils would have had any language teaching before. This attempts to obviously address the problem of continuity, because there's a lot of variation among primary schools that we feel really creates a problem when students enter post-primary education. And we wanted with this module to sort of level the playing field. We think that one of the reasons, obviously not the only one, but one of the reasons why pupils are nervous in picking a language for GCSE is because they are sort of mystified by some of the terminology. They're afraid they don't have enough of a background. Certain grammatical aspects might look difficult to them. So we feel that something like this would help them before they even encounter language learning. We want with this module to really bring tools of linguistic analysis, as I said, especially the comparative and the historical method. And we feel that this will be beneficial for students because it might help them understand certain properties of languages that might otherwise seem arbitrary and puzzling. So perhaps a good idea for that is gender in some of the languages that have it. So, Spanish or Italian. I don't even know if, I'm sure German also has gender. I should know that. And when students are trying to learn that, they find it, as I said, slightly arbitrary. And by trying to talk about the category of gender before you start learning it in a language, especially coming from a language like English that doesn't have it, I think it helps demystify these concepts. And finally, something that has been borrowed by our collaboration with the linguistics at MFL, group of people, we feel that linguistic analysis might appeal to students that have interests that go more towards the sciences. And we wanted to sort of give these students a chance to see that whether they would like learning languages, because perhaps languages are often associated with culture and with students that really like that aspect of literature and culture. But language learning also involves a lot of analysis, a lot of rule learning that might appeal to a different type of student. And we felt that it was important to cater for the students as well. So what we're going to hope to deliver at the end of this project, and we're sort of a bit more than halfway through, I think, but of course we could deliver much more, is lessons plans for teachers, PowerPoint presentations that can be used in the classroom. And for this year, because of COVID, we even did them with embedded voiceover, so they can be used almost entirely independently from the teacher if they wish to do so. Worksheets for exercises for the pupils, but also handouts that essentially take some of the key concepts of the class so that the students can take it at home with them. Initially, we thought we would also create videos of teacher training sessions, but because we created the voiceovers, we haven't had a chance to do it. So I'd be more than happy to hear your ideas on whether you would think that this would be necessary. This was one of our initial intentions, but we felt that it would be offset with the voiceovers on the PowerPoints. We aim to launch this resource at some point at the end of this academic year, perhaps September, and with a workshop where we would invite teachers from other schools in order to promote it, because our idea would be that all of these materials would be obviously free and available. And we would be grateful when we launch the resource if you would like to be involved and come to that. And a project website that I've included in the chat that will host all the materials. At the moment, it just says some information on the project because we're still piloting the materials. So just to talk a tiny bit about how we are going about this, I've talked a lot about our collaboration with our partner school, which I've said it really is invaluable. I think one of the biggest problems in trying to bridge linguistic and education is people actually working together, because linguists can have some ideas about what might be useful, but the teachers are the one delivering these resources, and they know they know the age group, they know their students much better than we do. So I think that this collaboration is absolutely important for and integral to any success of this project. And that's why also for me participating in a webinar like this, where I would hopefully get some feedback from you is important. We will be requesting feedback from the students themselves. So we have designed it in such a way that we try to get some feedback from the students before they do the project and after, because we're also really hoping that a project like this and students receiving a teaching of this kind would really alleviate some of the preconceptions regarding the difficulty of languages as a subject. We have, as I said, our research associate, Morgan MacLeod, who's devoting 100% of his time to produce these materials. And we have a steering group. So we are working also with members from the British Council in Northern Ireland, with CIA, which is the Council for Curriculum Examinations and Assessment, and some fellow linguists that have done a lot of interesting work on similar projects. So Professor Michelle Sheehan from Linguistics in MFL, Dr. Dora Alexopoulou, that is a principal investigator in Education First Lab in Cambridge, and Dr. Kevin O'Donnell from Ulster, who is a senior lecturer of Irish, and he is working on the Content and Language Integrated Learning Open Online Learning Project, the COOL, that is a fantastic mouthful. And we're also collaborating with Ian Collin from Queen's, who's the director of NICELT and is a lecturer in modern languages education. So we really felt that we needed substantial assistance in trying to bridge the two worlds together, the world of linguistics and the world of language teaching. So what I will show you now, before I dive into one of those classes, an overview of the content that we want to cover. So initially, when I say 1, 2, and 3, I don't necessarily mean that one can be only one class. Occasionally, for example, when we go to our meetings with the school, we prepare something and they say, maybe we need to break this up into 2 classes. We aim that this would be something that they could use for half an hour or 1 hour per week, depending on what the school would like to do. So we are introducing the project in the first class, and we talk about types of languages, how to understand our examples, exactly because we're using examples from a variety of languages, and language families and relationships. And this is what I'm going to present to you right after I finish this overview. The second class would be on writing systems and sounds and the difference between writing and speaking, talking about different types of alphabets, talking about pronunciation and how often it is not representative of the written form. And then we're going into parts of speech, and we're giving an overview of the parts of speech with nouns and verbs and all the rest of them, including, weird things that my students in university like to mistake one for another, like determiners or articles and prepositions. And then we take almost each part of speech and we dive inside it a bit further. So we start with noun and we talk about number and gender as categories that pertain to nouns and what exactly they do. We move on to case, which is my personal favorite. So we spend a lot of time working on that. Then we move on to determiners and we talk about types of articles, demonstratives, and different determiner systems in different languages. Then we move on to prepositions. And I think at this time it would be nice to say that the green stuff is the stuff that we've already completed, and the black stuff is the stuff that we haven't completed yet. And then we're moving into the verbal domain, and we take verb as a category. We talk about tense and aspect, the role of auxiliaries and different tense systems, then voice and mood. As we were talking the other day, I thought, oh, we haven't talked at all about subject and verb agreement, so we'll have to add that. It's a bit of a work in progress, and that's one of the beauties of this project, is that we're revising it, and we're trying to get the most of it. Then we will move to word order and of sentences, talking about subjects and objects, and how they relate to verbs inside a sentence, how sentences change their word order in questions or exclamations. And then we're going to be talking about complex sentences. So how we combine sentences and what happens to tense and mood when we do so. So we're going to talk about what linguists like to call types of embedding. So at the moment, I haven't checked the chat at all for any questions. I could pause for 1 millisecond and say that I'm going to move on now to a sample class, which, as I said, is the introductory class. So let me see if there's any questions on the chat that I should be looking at. No. It's I'm good, so I'll move on, if that's okay. So in the beginning of our class, we would give the students a roadmap. We say that, you know, this module is called language awareness, and we will talk about different ways of classifying languages today. And we will see how languages will be grouped into families and how language families develop. At school, we want to make it clear from the start how this is different from the other thing that they might do, that each language is usually taught in its own separate class. But in these lessons, we'll be looking at different languages at the same time. Some of these languages you might never have seen before, and you don't need to know how to speak them, but we will provide with enough information for you to understand what's going on. You may also know other languages besides the ones discussed here. And if you do, we'd like you to think about how these languages are similar or different from what we show, and we can discuss that in the class in the various activities. So why would we even be looking at examples from different languages? Because comparing languages lets us see what languages have in common. And it also lets us see how and why languages differ. And understanding the reasons for these differences can reveal the patterns that they form. And this would make it, hopefully, easier to learn them. And I really think this is the cross-linguistic method in a nutshell, and why it could be used to language teaching. So in order to understand different similarities and differences between languages, it can be useful to classify them into different types. So much in the same way that in biology you would classify different organisms or different animals, or different, or when studying plants, you would classify them into different families. Languages too can be classified in different types. But there is not just one way to classify languages. There's more than one ways. So one type of classification has to do with the parts of the sentence and how the parts of the sentence are ordered. So here, for example, we see three sentences in three languages that differ significantly in how they order constituents. So we have obviously English that has Mary bought a book. It has what we call a subject verb object, or an SVO order. And what you can see here is that we've color coordinated the different words that have the same meaning in different languages. And then we have Japanese that exemplifies the subject object verb word order. And then we also have Irish that exemplifies the verb subject object. So on the on the level of sentence structure and on the level of where we put things, this is one way to classify languages. We will come back to this at the very, very end of our lessons when we talk about differences in word order. There are possible orders, other possible orders in languages: verb, object, subject, and object, subject, verb, and even object, verb, subject. One interesting thing to note is that they are significantly less frequent, than the first three ones. But the reality is that from all the possible word orders, all of them are exhibited in the languages of the world. In languages like English, there is usually a single word order for subject, verb, and object. But then you have also languages like German. So English and German appear to be quite similar. On the first instance, Mary brought a book yesterday, exactly the same order in German. But as you know, in English, you could take an adverb like yesterday and put it at the beginning of the sentence. And you can do the same in German, but something happens in German that does not happen in English. So when you put the adverb in the beginning of the sentence, the rest of the sentence remains the same in English. So you have adverb and then subject, verb, object. In English, though, in German, though, when you front something like an adverb, you see the verb going into the second position after the adverb. Linguists adore, by the way, this phenomenon. There's been massive amounts of ink spilled to explain this phenomenon that is called the verb second. But it's interesting to note in this context that there are other various ways that languages can differ in terms of their word order, not just their basic word orders, but also what happens when you manipulate word order in a certain way. And at this point, we would pause and maybe do an activity with the students and ask them to think of other languages they might know, and think of the order that they know constituents in, and whether any of them show the same pattern as German. We've thought that we should have two types of activities in our lessons, some that are a bit more substantial and some that are a bit more discursive in the middle of the classes, and this is one of them. So in terms of language types, as I said, word order is not the only way to classify languages. But another way is to look inside words and to see ways that languages create complex words. So all languages create complex words by combining smaller units, just like English does when creates unhappy from un and happy, or development from development, but also chairs as opposed to one chair, or talked as opposed to talk. All of these are instances of creating complex words from combining smaller, simpler units. And languages can be classified in terms of what they combine and what they leave separate. Some languages, like Chinese, for example, prefer to express each aspect of meaning with a separate word. So what we see here is my dog barked in English and in Chinese. And what we see, for example, is that instead of this ed thing that English has on the verb, Chinese has le, which is a word that does not combine with the rest of the verb to form a complex verb. Another interesting thing to note for Chinese is that Chinese doesn't have a word for my, and that's why we don't have the same colors here. It has two words that I cannot pronounce that essentially means of me. And this is what Chinese would use instead of my. Other languages combine as much as possible into a single word. And one of these languages is Mapudungun, which is spoken in parts of Chile and Argentina. So in this language, the equivalent of an English sentence would be a word. So in English, I bought a cow, where with the subject, the verb, and the object would be a single word. And interestingly, also, you see that parts of the sentence that would have the same meaning are in a different place in the word of this complex language. So, so on the spectrum between Chinese that keeps everything separate and Mapudungun that puts everything on the one word, English falls somewhere in the middle, and languages are classified in terms of, as I said, how they combine their smaller units. One of the most important ways to classify languages, though, is in terms of their relationship with the other. And that leads us to discussing language families. So, as we all know, over time, languages change, and in fact, all languages change. And when varieties of a language change enough, they can become a separate language where speakers can no longer understand each other. One of the best known examples, at least for us in Europe, is Latin. Latin developed gradually from one single language into all the modern languages that we call Romance languages, such as Italian, French, and Spanish, but also, interestingly, Romanian or Occitan or even Portuguese. And because these languages are so far apart, people in each place wouldn't know how people in the other places spoke. And the relationships between languages and between these modern languages and Latin can be shown as a simple family tree. And what we see here is we have a mother language like Latin and daughter languages like Italian, French, and Spanish, signified as coming below the mother language in the family tree. And of course, they are related. They're sister languages between them because they have a lot of characteristics that they share with each other, to the exclusion of other languages that are not part of this tree. Of course, Latin has a history itself, and by tracing back the history of Latin and other languages, we can extend our family tree to show more relatives of Latin. And here is my, as a historical linguist, one of my favorite things in the world, the Indo-European family tree. And what we see here in red is, of course, a snapshot that we saw in the previous slide. And we see that most of the European languages are part of this language family that we call the Indo-European, that comprises also of languages that are spoken far away. So if you look on the right-hand side, you look at the Indic and the Iranian branch that has languages that are spoken further away from Europe. But also it has and reveals the relationship between the biggest language subfamilies that are spoken on the European continent, like Celtic, the Italic branch, the Germanic, the Balto-Slavic, and the Hellenic on the other side. In green, we have marked the languages that are still spoken today. And in black are the earlier languages that have developed into something different. And underlined languages are known to us directly from spoken or written sources, whereas others, for example, Indo-European, for example, sorry, and I don't have it here. That was a leap of thought. Proto Indoeuropean, the language that we think all of these languages developed from, we don't have direct records, but we think that it was spoken, and we can make some assumptions about its structure. And yes, languages, the example that Morgan used here more appropriately than me is Indic, of a language that has left no direct records. So as we see in those three, most European languages and many Asian languages belong to the Indo-European language family. And a thing that we can think of is how can languages that belong to the same family come to be spoken in places as far apart as Spain and Nepal? And of course, it's nothing more than migration of populations. People spread out gradually from one place to the other, just as the ancient Romans traveled from Italy into France and Spain. And of course, people speak their languages with them. We think, as I said, at the wrong place of the class, that all of the Indo-European languages descend from a single language called Proto Indoeuropean that was spoken about 6,000 years ago. And although we have no direct record because it was spoken before writing was invented, linguists have been trying and have been successful in reconstructing some of the Proto Indo-European by studying the similarities among languages. I'm not going to show anything like this now, but this is something that we will revisit in the lessons to come. And we will show you this type of reconstruction by comparing the different forms of the oldest daughters of Proto Indo-European. Obviously, Indo-European is not the only language family, and there is a lot more. There is the Finno-Ugric family, there is the Semitic language family, there is the Niger-Congo, there is the Sino-Tibetan, there are Austronesian languages, and there is also the Athabascan language family. And you see here that we have languages like Arabic and Hebrew being related, the African languages like Swahili and Zulu, we see are related and come from the Niger-Congo family. Asian languages like Burmese and Chinese are related and come from another family. And essentially exactly what we saw in the Indo-European tree, we can replicate for all of the other languages in the world and track similarities and the families of other languages. Interestingly, there are some languages that have no known relatives, and one of them is Basque, for example, that is spoken in parts of France and Spain. Basque is not only what we call a language isolate, it does not have relatives that we know of. It also seems to us that it does not have characteristics of the Indo-European family. It does not look as if it belongs in the Indo-European family. And this is something that we can see also in a map that follows, and we can see some interesting things there. So this is the map that we can see where countries speak Indo-European languages. Some other countries speak a mixture of Indo-European and non-Indo-European, and some of them speak non-Indo-European languages. I'm trying to move my head so I can read this. And this map is based essentially on where languages were originally spoken, but it obviously does not show all of the different places in the world where languages like English or Russian or Hindi are spoken today. We are just showing where they were originally from. And if you look at a map like this, that can lead us into our second and last activity for this class, to have a look at this map and maybe try to see whether we can notice something unusual. And if countries are different from the surrounding area, see whether we can identify and guess what's going on. So in this activity, we would like, for example, for the students to note that Finland is a part of Scandinavia that does not speak an Indo-European language. And maybe we can have an interesting conversation about why that might be. But interestingly, here on the right of Turkey, Armenia is an Indo-European language, where, for example, Turkish is not. And have an interesting discussion with the students on issues of migration of populations and language families. So this is just our conclusion. Languages can be, for the first class, languages can be classified in terms of how they form words and how the words are ordered. Over time, languages change and develop into one or more languages. Languages with the same origin can be grouped into language families, and classifying languages can help us see the many different types of similarities that languages can share. This brings me essentially to the end of this particular class, but also to the end of my talk. And I guess I wanted to say that really this project from us is an attempt to find another way and try to see whether linguistics can contribute something to language teaching. We feel that language learning really is at very difficult crossroads in the UK. And me as a linguist and as a non-native speaker of English myself, so as a speaker also of other languages, I would hate to see the subjects that I love so much be reduced to something that only some elites are able to learn. And I think that this is something that me as a linguist should really try and see whether we can reverse it. So I really feel that a collaboration between linguists and educators, like the ones that we're having in this project and like what we're doing now with this webinar, will be able to create materials that will inspire pupils, assist language learning, and can be usable in schools. And we really hope that a project like ours can help a bit reverse the trends that we are seeing. Thank you very much for your interest, and I will stop sharing my screen, and I will ask you to, if you want to say something or if you won't have any questions for us.